I'm just in awe. I've been sitting there and it's just powerful of every experience that we've heard throughout the 2 days. So I'm just excited for this and for us as the National Health Council to bring this conference to you. And truly, again, hopefully you've been able to see that we have the patient and the patient advocacy at the center of our discussion. So thank you for that. We will be going on to a small break, so please be back here by 11. And we will go ahead and hear from PCORI next. So thank you so much, and be back here promptly at 11. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone again to our next session. If you could all please take your seat. Thank you, everyone. Great. Welcome. I know it's been very interesting. You're connecting with new friends, old friends, family, whoever. So thank you so much. So I am Dr. Omar Contreras, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Equity Research and Programs at the National Health Council. So it is an honor to introduce our next speaker. But before I introduce Dr. Kristen Carmen, I just want to, again, thank PCORI for being such a wonderful partner to the National Council and all of our members today. We have been fortunate enough to have been awarded several of the Eugene Washington Awards focusing on patient engagement or work throughout the years. So I'm just really thankful again for having PCORI here. Dr. Carmen, she is the Director of Public and Patient Engagement at PCORI. For those of you who don't know what PCORI means, it is a Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. She is responsible for leading and directing PCORI's overall efforts to ensure that patients and other healthcare stakeholders are fully involved in the guiding aspects of PCORI's work and developing the science of engagement. Dr. Carmen leads a team that helps ensure that PCORI's unique community, patient-centered and partner approach to healthcare research shapes their research and the culture of research more broadly. She also leads the science engagement, including the launch of a new PCORI initiative that she will be speaking to you today. And I am certain that you will find her presentation enlightening. So, Dr. Carmen, it's all yours.
Well, thank you. I am really delighted to be here. Randall Nuthers, the National Health Council, has obviously been a terrific partner with PCORI, and we are grateful ourselves because we really do believe in bidirectional partnerships. That was a really powerful session we just heard, and a difficult act to follow. But I hope you will find this both interesting and helpful. But before I actually get launched, one of the things that I was asked to think about was life course and lifespan, and how would I fit that into my presentation? Because I am going to talk to you about our updated guidance for our awardees, which I think you will find both interesting and helpful. But I wanted to bring somebody into the room. I was thinking about this because my graduate school degree, you see I have a PhD, was in a program called Human Development and Social Policy at Northwestern University. And that program was started by a woman named Bernice Newgarden, ironically enough, who had been at the University of Chicago and asked to retire and then came to Northwestern for her second act to start a new program. But there's a point to this, thinking about the life course and some of what we've heard this morning. So when Bernice started school at the University of Chicago, she entered something called the Committee on Human Development, which is a multidisciplinary group looking at adolescence and childhood. And Bernice is known as a mother in gerontology in part because she initiated a course on aging. And there are many insights that Bernice had about the life course. But one of the most impactful is that what we consider a normal, expectable life course, what we do at different points of the life course, is really driven by a couple of fundamental things. It's norms and other things, so there's a lot of things about how we perceive the world and what we're supposed to be doing. When she went to Northwestern, she really thought about, how do I create a graduate program that helps people think about both how the state and structures structure the life course. We create a retirement program. Suddenly there's a thing called retirement. We create social policies and other kinds of things that influence how people think of their life course. But there's also the individual level, our norms, our experiences, medical advances, and other kinds of things. And I think one of the things that I always found so impactful about the program for me is always thinking about, how is it what we do as policymakers, or if we're not in the policy world, I'm as a part of a research institute, how is what we do shape people's lives? But also, what's the individual agency and people's ability to shape their own lives, and what's the interplay between the two, and how do we support both? And I think you've heard about both of those things today. So as we go forward, and I talk to you about what PCORI is doing now to update its guidance, I hope you will see that we think both on how do we support individuals to have agency and voice, as well as thinking about how do we structure things so that that is possible, it is probable, and meaningful. So with that, I'm going to take just a moment for, I appreciate some of the discussion of PCORI, but what we're going to talk about today is the foundational expectations for partnership, how they were developed, what they are, and a bit about the guidance that we're providing. As always, I always provide a quick overview of PCORI. I don't always entirely know how much people know about us, but we are an independent, non-for-profit research organization. Our job is to empower patients and others with actionable information about their healthcare choices. We fund clinical comparative effectiveness research, comparing one thing against another, two or more medical treatments, services, or practices. And then the findings from these, we hope, help patients and other partners make decisions at the point of care and informed decisions. Much of the research we fund is comparative effectiveness research, but as you just heard, we do also fund engagement awards to help build community and capacity. We also do methodology research, and we do research on the science of engagement to improve how we do this, and also research infrastructure. So that's the kind of the range of things that we do. We're a very large organization, and I think to date we've funded about $4 billion in research and infrastructure and other activities. I put up this slide just to help you understand PCORI's holistic approach, which you can see on this slide that we do obviously the development of research, infrastructure, dissemination, and implementation. This other slide is just to help you think a little bit about why do we engage. And you are all very familiar with the multiplicity of rationales for this, but it's important to remember there's a theory of action behind what we're all doing, right? Because we think engaging people up front in the research projects creates things that are meaningful and relevant and trustworthy research, and research that can be used in actionable and practical ways. I like to share this slide just as a precursor to some of what I'm going to share with you. So when we say that PCORI has incorporated individuals into everything we do, this slide really, call this the pipeline slide, but it really encapsulates, there's depth and breadth here. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of organizations and individuals represented by who we involved in what topics should we study in our programmatic input, in merit review itself. Every single one of our merit review when we are selecting projects involves patients and other partners as a part of the merit review process. And we also require engagement in our research awards, which we're going to be talking about the foundational expectations for partnerships related to the research awards, and also they're required to be in dissemination and implementation. So when I talk about what we've learned from engagement, it is from this extraordinary depth and breadth of engagement across the lifespan or the entire project span, from what topics as an institution should we be thinking about, all the way through the projects themselves. So let me talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing. So I think you've heard and I've said that PCORI has focused from the beginning on ensuring that patients and other partners inform and contribute to the research we fund. And that's been the case since our founding, and the people who, and by the way, the thing I didn't mention, just so that your context, we're of course not a federal agency. We were created by Congress, but we have, the Government Accounting Office actually names our board. So we have a board of governors. And that's basically how who give us a lot of oversight and input. We have a report to the GAO, et cetera, and some activities, but we do have a board of governors, which is a multi-stakeholder panel themselves, which is really critical to who we are. But that board and the board continues to view this as critical and important. So we're in a unique position because we've had access to now over 10 years. We were authorized in 2010 and reauthorized in 2019. That pipeline I told you about has been occurring since our beginning. So we've had this 10 years of experience. And so what we have learned in this process, if you'll see on the far right of that slide, is when and how engagement has occurred, common challenges, ways teams overcame these challenges, as well as the influence and impact of engagement on on projects. So this other slide I'm not going to go over in detail, but this laboratory of learning we've had, well actually now it's probably the last 14 years, provides a broad overview of our learnings. I just wanted to include this in your deck. I don't think we need to go into the details, except I want you to note that this figure lists both what is influenced in the studies, its conception, execution, and how it's carried out, and also how that occurs. And we've learned that you can do engagement in all kinds of projects, has huge benefits for individuals as well as the projects. And that feasibility and those lessons learned have been critical for how we think about how to support and require engagement in our projects. So some of you may be familiar, and I decided not to put the slide up because we want to move to the foundational expectations for partnership, but in the early days, PCORI said to awardees, you must engage people in projects, but we're not going to tell you how. And we had something called a rubric, which was basic guidance which said you should incorporate people from the design of projects, determination of outcomes, all the way through dissemination and implementation. We gave some examples and some important underlying values. But fast forward to this period of our learning so much from our own research and activities, we decided it was really critical to systematically translate the knowledge gained into a more cohesive framework for engagement, along with clear expectations and guidance. So we worked in collaboration with PCORI's Advisory Panel on Engagement, known as the PEEP. We also reviewed PCORI-generated evidence, evidence generated by others, organizations like yourselves, community-based participatory research in a lot of other fields, and we received input from researchers and patients from various types of projects and organizations. And from this, we created a list of 64 practices that we felt reflected meaningful engagement. And from that list, we identified relationships, redundancies, and critical areas of overlap. Then we held an inclusive and a very large convening with patients, partners, researchers, project leads, PEEP co-chairs, strategic partners, and other thought leaders, a truly multi-sectoral meeting. And through this work, we consolidated down to 8 expectations. And then finally, a final set of 6 foundational expectations, and we refined our approach to how to support people in using this. So these expectations are intended to be helpful to our applicants for research awards. They're also intended to be applicable and helpful, we hope, to the broader field. And I think for those with less experience, it provides, I hope, a more systematic and cohesive framework. And for those with more experience, the ability to refine their practice and their approach. So with that, I want to just note, and I say this to PCORI awardees, but for those of you PCORI familiar, these expectations should be familiar. They should not feel really distinct and different. It continues PCORI's emphasis on the meaningful engagement of patients and other partners across all stages of the research project, and to apply the best approach to engagement tailored to their study. And so we have built and captured engagement practices based on what researchers and partners have said improve the study acceptability and feasibility, as well as the relevance. And you can imagine in pragmatic real-world research, those are really critical things, right? It has to be feasible, it has to be acceptable, meaning you're willing to do it in practice, it can be done, and it also has to be relevant and meaningful to the people who have to use the information. We attempted to really continue to promote partnership and clear guidance. So with that, the guidance collectively includes, so this is kind of a big picture of what this is. We have an updated definition of what is meaningful engagement. 6 foundational expectations for partnership, and information to support the implementation of each expectation. So I'm going to start with the updated definition. So we revised our definition of meaningful engagement to emphasize the importance of active partnership. And I think you heard quite a bit about that earlier, right? Wanting to have active partnership. So this is what this means in our context. So the revision acknowledges that there is a continuum of engagement from input to consultation, collaboration, and shared leadership, which you see on that slide, moving from left to right. Obviously, like all work in this field, we are relying on the work of Ehrenstein's ladder of participation. On the far left, you see how input's more unidirectional. For example, surveying large groups of people, focus groups, can also be quantitative research, right? And I know for many of you in the pharmaceutical industry, there's a lot of highly quantitative information. Consultation is where partners contribute more deeply as advisors in an ongoing way. Moving towards collaboration, in the PCORI context, we have co-investigators, people who actually participate more strongly in the research, and also they are involved in study governance, right, with multi-stakeholder executive committees who participate in decision-making. And the far right, we have shared leadership, where partners serve as co-PIs and lead specific study tasks and groups. So this new definition emphasizes that activities that only include input, such as surveys and focus groups, as the sole approach to engagement are no longer considered engagement. That is not the same thing, and I've heard this from some PIs, are you saying we can't do it? No, of course I'm not saying that, and we're not saying that, right? That can be an important component of what you do. We're simply saying that having active, ongoing collaboration in other formats is really critical. Why are we saying this? Again, because we learned that the most successful studies often employ a range of strategies across this continuum at different points in the study to fit the study's needs. Engagement's not one thing, it is many things and many things at different times. So that's the first thing we did, which was, I think, and in fact, it's not a huge change. Most of our projects don't do this, but we think it's really important to emphasize this. So these 6 foundational expectations translate our definition of engagement into action by focusing on what projects should do. This graphic really, I hope, represents for you that while there are 6 expectations, they function as a collective whole. And they really, as a whole, they kind of interplay and work together. And so they relate to each other and they reinforce each other. And it's, again, I hope you will see a systematic structure for thinking about engagement. And as you do work with one expectation, it's going to help you with other expectations. And just as an example, if you're thinking about the early and ongoing engagement, which is in the middle there, right? It's likely that you're going to be thinking about how am I building capacity to work as a team. Right? These are not sort of necessarily linear, but they often work together and they help you think about it. And these expectations, as we've laid them out for folks, is that they allow for flexibility, creativity, and really continuous learning, which is at the heart of what we put here. So let me go to the first one. I am not going to read off each of these definitions. I assume that you can read them yourself, but I'm just talk a little bit about each one in turn. Our guidance has always called for project teams to include a diverse group of partners to make the research more patient-centered and relevant, right? And we have found, and we've heard from our PIs and from awardees and participants, that incorporating diverse viewpoints into study planning and conduct is a very strong strength of our studies and the studies that do them. This expectation provides clear expectations and support about the intentional inclusion of these partners and organizations. And it really focuses also on discussing partner concerns and priorities, as well as transparently sharing information to allow partners to make informed decisions about how and when and the ways in which they want to participate in research. The second expectation is early and ongoing. We've always described at PCORI as a part of our materials that partners can play a role in studying planning, conduct, dissemination, implementation, as I told you. That was the original rubric, saying you really need to think about these in the life course of it. But researchers have noted to be truly successful, projects have to engage partners as early as possible in the study planning and then in every part of the life cycle of projects. So this expectation really emphasizes how critical it is to talk with partners about the ways they can best contribute and identify potential barriers to engagement, right? It can affect how the team can work together. Some of these can take a while to address, and it's important to identify and to begin to address them earlier. And there's nothing worse for people than trying to bring people to the table only to discover the way and the structure they're doing it isn't going to work, and they're not able to retain people. And in terms of definition, I want to be clear here because I've been in other settings. When we are talking about engagement, we are talking about engagement in the research process. Not, how am I getting people to get into my clinical trial? This is about how am I engaging them in the research process. And we heard some of that earlier about please include us more upstream in the process. That's the early ongoing, helping you think about the questions, the outcomes, et cetera. We have an existing framework, and so does the National Health Council. I'm sure you are all very familiar with thinking about compensation and budgeting. And we have, as I've noted to my colleagues here, we're in the midst of thinking about that compensation framework. Our compensation framework really historically has focused on helping applicants and awardees think about how do you compensate participants. This expectation really emphasizes what we heard from partners throughout the development process about how important it was that partners be compensated for their time and expertise, that there needs to be discussion of the type, amount, and frequency of compensation with partners, and also the need for transparency around the scope, the work, budget, and budget revisions that may alter the course of projects so that partners are aware of that as well. So what this expectation also emphasizes is that teams have to dedicate funds to support engagement, whether it's providing funds for someone to participate, which we just talked about, but also ensuring that there are funds to support engagement. It could be budgeting for language services, caregiver relief services, or even technology like tablets or things for the internet. So the notion is that we're going to want a little better idea of what are the supports for engagement. Again, talking about systems and processes, and it's clarity for our applicants, it's also clarity for PCORI. The next expectation is building capacity to work as a team, because research is a team sport. If you're not into sport, it is definitely a team enterprise, right? And so throughout PCORI's existence, really, researchers and partners have asked for support, right? We had the rubric out, we said you must engage, we didn't tell you how. Well, how do we do this? How do we work as a team? So we've actually done quite a bit of work in this arena. We have learning resources that we've had for some time, building effective multi-stakeholder research teams, as well as research fundamentals to help support applicants and their awardees to better understand the research process. This continues to build on those efforts, but really emphasizes a strength-based approach, recognizing that people are bringing strengths to the table and unique strengths. And it also emphasizes that orientation, and Ushma said this herself, but orientation, education, and training is for all team members. Right? It's not just for the patients or the other stakeholder partners. And in our world, those are employers, payers, other individuals. But it's also for the researchers and the research team, because both parties need to be prepared to work as a team and prepared for this engagement. And people don't necessarily know how to do this. It's a skill like anything else. Okay. The next expectation is meaningful inclusion of partners in decision making. And I think you remember that I said to you that one of the things that, of all the knowledge we gathered, it's both about what works, but also the challenges for individuals. And so I think this is a really good example of both what we've learned is that including partners in key decisions at critical points is extremely helpful. And I'm going to link you back to what I said earlier about why we think that more than input is critical. And remember, with input as for the researchers in the room or others who do the projects, I know what I want to know. I'm going to find out get information from you, and I'm going to figure this out. One of the things we learned in the projects is that a lot of meaningful input and influence and impact on the feasibility and the acceptability of projects comes from these ongoing interactions. Because one of the critical things happens is that researchers can be redirected, right? I wasn't going to ask you a question about that, but your advisory panel says, you know what? That is so not going to work. It could be your clinician saying, that's not equipoise. You are not randomizing. I'm not randomizing those patients. That's not going to work. Or it could be your patient saying, look, you can put out that measure, but nobody's going to respond to that. Nobody's going to answer that, right? So this is the part about how do you think about those critical points. The other point is you want to think about what we also noticed. It's important to be really mindful and upfront. How are partners going to be included in decision making? We've heard that it's really important for people to adjust approaches, but also it's important for everybody to understand what is the decision making. Oftentimes we'll hear people say, well, our decision making is consensus. Not necessarily, right? Consensus might be I'm taking all the input and then I'm deciding. And so it's really helping partners and others understand what your decision making really is and getting everybody clearly understanding. And at what point in the projects, maybe it is more unidirectional and where it's bidirectional and maybe it is consensus. It reduces conflict. It creates for better outcomes for everybody. The last expectation is ongoing review and assessment of engagement. And heard some of this discussion earlier. This emphasizes that all teams can improve their engagement practices, and to do that, they have to periodically assess how is engagement going. Projects that collected this information early on were actually able to pivot and support better relationships with their partners. And we know that in the field of engagement, we still don't have a lot of validated measures at this point. We ourselves, PCORI, is funding through the Science of Engagement, along with studying effective engagement strategies. We are also looking at developing and studying measures. So while researchers have always included plans to assess, what this is really highlighting is that we think it's important to get feedback in every project, and it can be qualitative, open-ended, it can be quantitative. The most important point of this expectation and the real focus here is more about continual learning as a team, and adjusting the engagement approach to meet the needs of both the researchers on the team and the patient and other partners. So in some might say, well, I keep telling you how this is similar, but what the heck is really different? Well, big picture here is there's going to be flexibility in how people implement them, and we think this is critical. We have a lot of materials on our website and resources to help people address these issues. In fact, we've reoriented a lot of materials to the expectations to make it easier for people. But where the guidance has really evolved critically is, again, inputs like survey can be a component, but not the sole component of engagement. Budgeting for engagement, we have always provided resources for engagement, but we will have clear understanding of where those resources are going, as well as the assessment. And the rest of the materials really are providing a systematic framework to think through, ask themselves critical questions, and what they need to do for engagement. So I'm including this because we have a lot of resources, but let me go back 1 second, because I'm not going to go through a lot of detail, but just at a high level, I really encourage you to take a look at our website because we have an overview as a PDF that sort of gives the big picture of what this all is. Then there's layered information for each and every one of the expectation, a definition, how it can be met for a project, questions to help teams get started, because this is, again, about critical practice and thinking, right? We're giving flexibility. You have to tailor it to your project. And actions that teams can take to put these into practice, examples of PCORI-funded projects that have done this, links to other engagement resources, and we continue to evolve ways of helping people understand what these are and how to support them. If you take a look at these and you have thoughts and ideas about how we could better support people in adopting and adapting these expectations, we would be delighted to hear it. This is going to be an evolving resource. The expectations are not evolving, but the resources to support them will be evolving as we hear from people what would better help and support them. I think I have to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carmen. Are there any questions for Dr. Carmen? Yes, please go ahead.
Hi there.
Hello.
I don't know if you were here for the previous panel, but I'm in the infertility space, and we have been, at our organization, we have been asked to be on many PCORI grants, none of which were ever funded. So if there is an avenue, and we were not the leads, we were the patient group, right? Mm-hmm. So we were the one that was going to engage in all these ways. And I am not a researcher. I am not somebody who applies for grants in that realm, so I can't offer any assistance. But if there are ways that potential PIs, grantees can talk to PCORI, or if you have ideas on ways that they can put forward fundable, winnable grants, that would be amazing, and then I can help direct them in that way. That would be awesome. Thank you.
One thing I would encourage you to encourage your PIs and other groups to do is to attend things like the applicant workshops we have. I think look very carefully at our PFAs and what it is that we say we are really prioritizing funding. I also, just as a sidebar, I am often amazed at how much individuals, I won't say in your case because I have no idea, do not take advantage of talking to our program officers. We have various, on our website, if you look at the PFAs, various ways, if you have a question, ask it because that's how you get a meeting with program officers. Program officers are deeply invested in supporting people getting funding and helping them support their work. I will also note, though, that because we do clinical comparative effectiveness research, it's a little bit different. It can be a challenge sometimes. We do also now have some new methodology standards on comparisons to usual care, which I think will help some folks thinking about what does that look like, because it is a unique set of funding, right? We don't do developmental funding per se. It has to be comparing one thing to another or one practice, et cetera, which can be a little bit of a challenge. But I really say, go to the town halls, go to the applicant workshops, and please, please ask to meet with program officers because they always say yes. There's no such thing as a no in PCORI land to anybody wanting to meet and discuss. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Luther Clark from Merck. Really enjoyed your presentation. A couple of things. I assume this new guidance is now available on your website?
It is indeed. Yes,
it is. Okay, great. And it sounds like the evolution of the new guidance was certainly based largely on the projects that were submitted. But I was wondering, at PCORI, two questions. How do you go about getting direct input from patients? And was that done in developing this guidance? And how do you score? They're the components that are required, but do you score them individually, or do you just assess their presence?
No, those are great questions. I shouldn't say no. I always do that. What is it? I'm not the only person who does that. No, yes. Yes. let me try that again. Let me try to track your questions. First of all, perhaps moving too fast. These foundational expectations for partnership, and I think Ushma could attest to this, have been gestating for a long time in a lot of different work. But it is built, the chassis, the undergirding is, I think I told you we funded for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of research projects at PCORI and lessons learned in this amazing laboratory where, with similar guidance, everybody had to do engagement in projects, right? And remember, we didn't say how, we said you had to. We had a lot of variation and diversity. We also gathered research from lots of other fields. So there's a huge undergirding of a research chassis because it has to be evidence-based. But then that very extensive process of bringing in input. So I didn't have time to talk about it, but not only did we have a convening, we had an extensive process of internal information. We work with a contractor, actually, American Institutes for Research. One of the staff is here who helped us do looking at other kinds of approaches other funders were taking, helping us amass examples and exemplars, as well as doing a tremendous amount of work within PCORI and with our awardees. So this was an incredibly multi-step, multi-sector process. In terms of how PCORI engages as an institution, PCORI has a lot of involvement. We have advisory, first of all, we have a multi-stakeholder board, we have advisory panels, we also do extensive work with community input and individual sector input. We have payer forums, clinician convenings, and we often have a great deal of convenings of organizations that belong to the National Health Council involved in topic themes and what topics. So as an institution, we have a lot of involvement and lay input, by the way, not just advocates and activists, but also lay public. So as an institution, we have a lot of input. And then, of course, finally, your last question, there are 6 review criteria in PCORI Awards. The 2 that kind of relate to this is patient-centeredness and engagement. The patient-centeredness is assuring that the outcomes matter, topics matter to people. We do have 8 criteria that has to be scored on the engagement itself in every single award.
Great. Last quick question. Go for it.
Yeah, just very quickly, similar to my colleague's comment previously, I'm Ashley White from the Amputee Coalition, and we often are asked to be the patient engagement component of people's research submissions. So we find ourselves being the conduit for engaging the community in meaningful ways in research. And this year we hired a clinician researcher, decided we were going to go for it ourselves, brought in a partner at an institution, and I think it's been a fascinating experience. As you know, the submissions were due yesterday or the day before. I can't remember, the days run together, but I think there was so many tools there. I just wanted to encourage the people in the room that, like, not just to be the person that people come to, that we can also, as patient advocacy organizations, initiate our expectations for researchers. I think that's a role that we should be playing, and helping the community, our community, the patients that we represent, be more involved, giving them opportunities and kind of being a conduit. So I wanted to say thank you, because I thought the guidance that was provided on PCORI's website was tremendous, and it empowered us as an organization to try to create opportunities for the patients that we represent in more meaningful ways. So.
Thank you. And for those of you not familiar, if I might just take a moment, I remind you the different types of funding we have. So we have research awards. That is the clinical comparative effectiveness research. We also have methods in science of engagement awards, which are research awards as well, which go through our merit review process. But then we also have dissemination and implementation awards. And then for the Eugene Washington, those are not research awards, right? Those are capacity building awards. They are opportunities to bring communities together. They are opportunities to bring communities together also to come up with topics and areas that matter to them, and even to disseminate to their community. So if you're interested in our work and ways that you can apply for our funding, I'll remind you to look at all of those things. With that, I am getting exited off the stage. Bye.